I was hiding from my own house party when she walked through my study door. That is the fact of it. Lucian Hale, Duke of Ashfern, master of 4,000 acres, and sole proprietor of every awkward silence in the county, had retreated to the one room in the hall he could be tolerably certain no one would follow him into, and found that he was wrong. It was October. The house party had been my grandmother's idea, as most catastrophes are. She had filled Ashfern Hall with 14 guests, 3 of their daughters, an assortment of cousins, and 1 small elderly spaniel, who belonged to nobody but had taken up residence on the hearthrug in 1821 and declined to leave. The daughters were accomplished, the cousins were cheerful, the guests spoke at length about my parkland, and at shorter length about anything of interest. By the second evening I had excused myself 3 times to inspect the stables, which do not require inspection after dark, and once to count the candles in the east corridor, which required no counting at all. At 9:30 on the third evening, I slipped into my own study, closed the door behind me without a sound, and stood in the pleasant dark for a moment, breathing. The study had not been lit. I had not called for a lamp. I stood there, with one hand still on the door handle, listening to the distant piano from the drawing room, and congratulating myself on my escape. Then something moved in the corner by the bookcase. I did not shout. I came very close to it. "I beg your pardon," said a voice from the dark. It was a woman's voice, low, composed, and rather more collected than my own thoughts at that moment. "I thought this room was empty. I was mistaken. I will leave immediately." There was the quiet sound of someone gathering their skirts, and then a soft collision with the corner of my writing desk, followed by a sharply controlled intake of breath that was not quite a word. "You've hit the desk," I observed. "I am aware of that, Your Grace." "You know who I am." "I have known for a moment, yes." A pause. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was avoiding someone." "As was I," I said, and then, because it seemed relevant, "The desk has a sharp corner on the left. Mind it going around." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you," she said carefully, "telling me where the furniture is so that I can leave more efficiently, or are you making conversation?" I considered this. The piano from the drawing room played on. Outside, there was the distant sound of my grandmother's laugh, distinctive as a bell and twice as carrying. "I haven't decided," I said. "Which would you prefer?" I heard her exhale. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, somewhere precisely in between. That was the moment. I did not know it then. I would know it later, turning the evening over in my mind as a man turns a coin, looking for the hinge. The hinge was the exhale, the quiet half-laugh of a woman who had expected to be looked through, and found she was being spoken to instead. We might have stood there in the reasonable dark indefinitely, each of us avoiding our own version of the evening's obligations, each of us minding the furniture, except that the door opened. My grandmother did not knock. My grandmother had not knocked in 67 years, and saw no cause to begin. Light flooded in from the corridor. She was holding a candelabra in one hand, and wearing an expression of such triumphant surprise that it was entirely transparent. The woman by the bookcase was a few years under 30, slight, with dark hair, dressed plainly, and a gown of muted blue that would not have caught anyone's eye in a room full of silk and plumes. She had one hand raised to shade her face from the sudden light, and in her expression, braced, resigned, reaching for composure, I saw everything I needed to know about her situation at this house party. She had been invisible in the drawing room for 3 evenings. She had been invisible in the dining room, and at the garden walk, and at every card table. She had arranged herself in corners, and let herself be arranged out of conversations, and said, "Oh, my cousin is the one who," whenever anyone looked at her by accident and seemed disappointed. She was the companion, the useful one, the one who came so that the fashionable cousin would have someone to carry her shawl and agree with her observations. My grandmother looked at her, then at me, then at the unlit room, which she had lit with the efficiency of a woman producing evidence in a trial. "My goodness," said my grandmother, in a tone of absolute delight. "I didn't realize anyone was in here." "Grandmother," I said, "forgive me. I was just looking for—" She paused for a barely perceptible moment, as one calculates. "The atlas. But I see you're occupied." She turned her head toward the hallway behind her, where two of the house party guests had followed the sound of the door and now stood watching with the benevolent attention of people who have been slightly bored for 3 days. "Lucian has been showing Miss." She angled the candelabra gently in the woman's direction. "Finch," said the woman, with the flat clarity of someone accepting a sentence. "Miss Finch, the library," my grandmother concluded. "He has quite taken her under his wing. He can be so attentive when he chooses." She smiled at me. It was the smile of a woman who has spent 67 years getting precisely what she wanted. I thought he'd never make his choice, and here we are. What followed in the next 7 minutes, I will not recount at complete length, because it is the kind of 7 minutes that lives in family legend and ought to be abbreviated in the telling. Suffice it to say that 2 guests became 4, 4 became 8, and by the time Miss Finch had given her name in full, "Dorothea," she said, with the careful diction of someone who knows the information is going to be repeated. The house party had a new topic, and my grandmother had the expression of a general surveying terrain that has fallen according to plan. Miss Finch did not produce the hysteria that might have been expected. She did not flutter or weep or look to me for rescue. She stood very straight in the light of the candelabra and said, "I apologize for any confusion. I took the wrong door. I hope it hasn't inconvenienced anyone." And then she withdrew, with a composure so complete it was almost aggressive. I watched her go. The door closed. My grandmother refrained from saying anything for approximately 4 seconds, which was a personal record. "She's lovely," she said. "You did that deliberately," I said. "I have no idea what you mean." She set the candelabra on my writing desk, adjusted the angle of the tallest candle, and said serenely, "I'll have Mrs. Crane set a place for her next to you at dinner tomorrow. She has excellent posture." I spent the next 3 days in the peculiar position of a man who neither confirmed nor denied anything, and found that the act of neither confirming nor denying kept drawing him back to the same rooms as a woman called Dorothea Finch. I told myself I was deciding what to do. I was the Duke of Ashfern. I had every right to correct a misunderstanding. I had only to say the word, and the 8 witnesses of that evening would accept the clarification. My grandmother would be irritated, but she would recover. Miss Finch would be released from an awkward position not of her making, and we would both return to the respective things we had been doing before she took the wrong door. I said nothing. I decided to continue deciding, and went to inspect the library. She was there. She had, apparently, an ongoing disagreement with Porridge, my steward, Mr. Llewellyn Porridge, a man of meticulous habit who had arranged the East Wing Library by the date of acquisition, rather than by subject, and she was correcting this with the quiet, methodical energy of someone who has been given an excellent reason to be busy. "He'll know where everything is," I said, from the doorway. "He'll know where everything was," she said, without looking up. "When someone else comes looking for Gibbon, they'll find him between a volume of naval dispatches from 1804 and a recipe collection. That is not where Gibbon belongs." "Porridge has been here longer than Gibbon," I offered. "That is not an argument." She moved Gibbon. "Has anyone ever told Porridge that?" "Regularly," I said. "He waits them out." "I have more patience than Porridge," she said, quite simply, and turned to the next shelf. I stayed. There was a chair near the east window that I had sat in perhaps 3 times in a decade, and I sat in it again and watched her work. It occurred to me, around the midpoint of the second shelf, that I had not sat in that chair voluntarily since my father died and left me the estate and the title and the considerable weight of both, and that sitting in it now felt surprisingly easy. She was not performing. She was not aware of me in any way that suggested she was aware of me. She had a system, clearly, and she was executing it, and the occasional quiet commentary she offered was aimed at neither of us in particular, and both of us at once. "This one is misfiled as philosophy," she said, turning a slim volume over in her hands. "It is poetry. Poor Wordsworth." "Porridge has views on Wordsworth," I said. "Does he consider him a philosopher?" "He considers him inaccessible, which amounts to the same thing." She set Wordsworth in his proper place, with a small decisive push, the way one might finish an argument. I found I was smiling. I had not noticed myself do it. She was not performing. That was the thing I kept returning to, the thing I could not find a satisfying explanation for, and tried to find anyway, because it occupied me through 2 dinners and a morning ride and an afternoon in the orangery, where I was not looking for anyone, and found her reading in the south corner chair. She was not angling herself to catch my eye, or modulating her opinions for my benefit, or appearing in rooms where I would notice her. She appeared in rooms because she had a reason to be in them. The library, because she was reorganizing it. The orangery, because it was warm. The garden, because the elderly spaniel had followed her out, and she did not see why he should have to come back until he was ready. At dinner she said almost nothing, which would not have distinguished her from a great many people at the table, except that the nothing she said was clearly chosen. She listened with the focused quiet of someone who is genuinely interested in what other people think, a quality so rare at a house party that I had nearly forgotten it existed. When she did speak, it was to ask a question, usually the precise one that would allow the person speaking to say what they had actually meant, rather than what they had said. The guest to her left, a retired captain with strong opinions about the corn laws, had been trying to make a particular point about the Midland harvests for 20 minutes, when she asked it, and the relief on his face was the relief of a man who has finally been understood. I watched that too. Nobody at the house party was in any room without a reason connected to me. Miss Finch was in rooms because she had her own reasons, and that distinction had become, over the course of 3 days, the most interesting thing at Ashfern. My grandmother found me in the east corridor on the 4th morning, and said, without preamble, "He hasn't denied it." I beg your pardon? Not to her, not to the guests, not to me. She adjusted my cravat in a way that suggested she had arrived for a purpose, and was fulfilling it. She's been braced for it since the 2nd evening, waiting for you to produce the clarification. She has it all prepared. I can tell by the set of her jaw when she comes into a room you're in. She's very well controlled, but she's waiting. She patted the cravat. I thought you should know that she's noticed you haven't. You planned the entire thing, I said. I planned to open a door, she said. What happened afterward was entirely your business and hers. She gave the cravat a final adjustment. I merely noticed you'd been following her through the library and the orangery and the herb garden for 3 days, and thought that someone should give the pair of you a reason to stop being polite about it. I had not thought of it that way. I thought of it that way for the rest of the morning. At 2:30, I found her in the herb garden with the spaniel, asleep on her feet, reading Cowper, and making occasional small annotations in pencil in the margins, which suggested she had strong opinions about Cowper. Miss Finch, I said. She looked up. The braced expression was there, the quiet preparation of a woman ready to receive news she has decided to accept gracefully. I know what you're going to say, she said. You needn't have come outside. I intended to speak to you myself this afternoon. I thought I would tell the guests that I had confused the rooms, that there was nothing of consequence, and that any misunderstanding on the evening in question was entirely my fault and your grandmother's imagination. Which is accurate. It is accurate, I agreed. So, she closed the Cowper. The spaniel stirred and resettled. You are free of it, Your Grace. There's no need for anyone to be inconvenienced further. I had been, I should mention, the most feared man at the autumn sessions of the County Magistrates' Court for 11 years running. I had managed the settlement of a disputed will through 42 months of correspondence, without losing my temper. I had once refused, in the space of a single dinner, an entail, a trade alliance, and a proposal of marriage from a baronet who had confused the entree with the proposition. I said, I've had 4 days to deny it. Why do you suppose I haven't? She looked at me for a long moment. The spaniel did not stir. I don't know, she said at last. I have been trying to work that out myself. I sat down on the garden bench adjacent to hers, which was probably not the conventional approach, but I had been standing in doorways watching her reorganize things for 4 days, and felt I had earned a seat. I went to the study that evening to be alone. I have found that since you arrived, alone has become remarkably less interesting than it was before. The corners of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, very nearly. You watched me argue with porridge, she said. I found it educational. And follow the dog into the garden. More than once. She looked down at the spaniel, who had opened one eye and closed it again. He kept coming to find me, she said. I didn't see why he should have to come back before he was ready. Yes, I said. I noticed that. A beat. The October garden was very quiet. A wood pigeon, somewhere in the elm line, the smell of the herb beds, and the first cold of the afternoon coming in off the low fields. "Miss Finch," I said, "would you like to stay?" She looked at me again. "Not because my grandmother maneuvered you into a dark room and announced it to 8 witnesses," I said. "Not because you would be inconvenienced to deny it, or because it is the simpler resolution, but because I find I cannot picture Ashburn without someone correcting Porridge's cataloging system and making sure the dog gets to stay in the garden long enough." A pause, a proper one this time, not the silence of someone calculating how to be polite, but the silence of someone deciding something real. "I thought," she said, "that you were going to say you'd had 4 days to deny it and still hadn't managed it, and then ask me if that told me anything." I said that first. "You did." She turned the cowper over in her hands. Once, twice, the spine of it against her palm. "It told me something. I wasn't quite certain what. And now?" She set the cowper down on the bench. The spaniel opened both eyes. "Ask me properly," she said. I asked her properly. There was no ring at hand. I remedied that before the week was out. And no audience. And no declaration of any kind that I would be comfortable repeating in company. But she said yes, and she said it before I had quite finished asking, with the particular composure of a woman who had made her decision some days earlier, and had simply been waiting for the question to catch up. We were married in December, at Ashburn, in the small family chapel that had not hosted a wedding in 16 years. The guests were few, and specifically invited. My grandmother occupied the front pew in a gown of deep rose, and the expression of a woman looking at evidence in a trial she has already won. The spaniel sat in the aisle because Miss Finch, because Dorothea, had not seen a reason to shut him out, and so he was there, and that seemed correct. Porridge reorganized the library back to acquisition order 3 days after the wedding. Dorothea reorganized it again the following week. They have been conducting this negotiation for 2 years. I find I am in no hurry to resolve it. She still reads in the orangery, when the afternoons are cold and the garden is no fit place to be. She still makes annotations in the margins of books in a pencil so light it is nearly invisible, and has strong opinions about Cowper, and stronger opinions about Porridge's cataloging methodology, and feeds the spaniel from the good table when she thinks no one is looking, which she knows I am always looking, and doesn't stop. I was hiding from my own house party when she walked through my study door. I was the luckiest man in the county.